Greetings from the drowsy Science Channel. I'm happy you've arrived here. Perhaps you're the type of person who likes to round off the evening with something leisurely, quiet and inquisitive, or perhaps it's been a hard day. You're in the right place if you enjoy falling asleep to science, while hopefully picking up a few new facts. Simply recline, take deep breaths, and allow your thoughts to calm down. The voyage tonight remains near the Earth, near dirt, sunlight, roots, and leaves. We're posing a question that may seem straightforward or even odd, yet it leads to something far more profound. We are aware that plants grow. We are aware of their reaction. Is that all, though? Is there more? Do plants have the capacity for thought? If these peaceful investigations help you unwind, fall asleep, or simply add a little peace to the end of your day, please think about softly hitting the like button and subscribing before we attempt to answer these questions. One drowsy soul at a time, it guides others to this place as well. If you would like to share, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from or what subjects you would like to learn more about next. Let's get started. Movement comes to mind when we think about intellect. A fox adapting its hunt to the changing conditions. A dolphin figuring out a fish puzzle. The tiniest insects use memory, scent, and sight to find their way around. Intelligence in the animal kingdom is action linked to decisions made in real time as the environment changes. However, what sort of intellect may be present in silence? From the time it sprouts, a plant is fixed in place. It is unable to run from a predator, pursue a mate, or seek out better light. Nevertheless, plants have dominated almost every habitat on Earth for millions of years. Deep shadow, salt flats, mountaintops, deserts, wetlands, and forest canopy. They accomplish this without a brain, a neurological system, or anything else that we would typically think of as thought. Nevertheless, they continue to live. They adjust. They frequently make choices that are similar to the trade-offs that animals have to make. It's not a metaphor. It is a problem of science, and scientists are just starting to solve it. Indeed, some scientists now think that we might have a completely different understanding of plants. Perhaps there is a form of intelligence hidden in their peaceful biology that humans have just never been able to perceive. The fact that plant behavior develops at a rate we're not accustomed to seeing contributes to the difficulty. A plant may react in a matter of hours, days, or even weeks, whereas an animal may react in a matter of seconds. However, slowness does not equate to inactivity. We might have been measuring the wrong kind of clock, that's all. Up to 20 distinct environmental cues can be detected at once by certain plants. Light, wetness, touch, gravity, nutritional concentrations, chemical gradients, and even variations in the presence of other creatures in the vicinity. They integrate these inputs rather than merely passively detecting them. They act after weighing them against each other. Roots are not developing at random when they branch toward a hidden water supply. They are disregarding others while reacting to a signal. Perhaps more than just a reflex occurs when a leaf slightly tilts to avoid its neighbor's shadow, or when a seed waits for the chemicals in the environment to suggest safer conditions before germinating. It is contingent. It's picky. Context is the foundation, and one of the characteristics of intelligence is context. Terms that long appeared unimaginable in bots, decision-making, anticipation, and even learning have been used by plant scientists in recent years. Metaphors are not what these are. They explain occurrences that can be seen and tested, behaviors that change throughout time as well as depending on the circumstances. Plants may recall because they sometimes seem to modify their reactions in the future depending on what happened in the past. Mimosa pudica, the delicate plant, is one example. Its leaves quickly fold inward when touched. This defense mechanism is believed to keep water from evaporating or to discourage animals. However, in lab experiments, the plant eventually ceased closing when researchers repeatedly sprayed water over these leaves from a set height. It had discovered the stimulus was safe. The folding resumed when a new stimulus was added, such as shaking. It wasn't exhaustion. It was picky. The most amazing thing is that even after the plants were relocated to different settings, the reaction continued for weeks. Despite having neither a nervous system nor neurons, the plant somehow stored the experience and changed its behavior as a result. What more abilities could the leaf and root conceal? Now, scientists from all across the world are attempting to discover that. Not only the responses of plants, but also their information processing. Because it appears that plants are interpretative as well as receptive the more we examine them. Inputs are weighed. Noise is filtered by them. In several instances, they appear to serve as models for subsequent events. Consider climbing bean plants as one example. They were exposed to rotating light sources in one experiment, which were lights that rotated across a surface in a predictable rhythm. As anticipated, the plant initially developed slowly in the direction of the light's current location. However, something changed with time. The plant started to adapt to where the light would be rather than where it was. In anticipation of its arc's next phase, it shifted course immediately before the light moved. A type of expectation is suggested by this anticipatory growth, something more subtle, a model of repeated experience stored in behavior, rather than the conscious sensation we associate with animals. It's the plant counterpart of forecasting the weather by recalling yesterday's patterns. Furthermore, this suggests that plants may be tracking not only what is but also what might be, even if they may not be thinking in the conventional sense. However, it wasn't the only instance. In another experiment, scientists subjected a little blooming plant called Arabidopsis thaliana, which is frequently used in genetic studies, to cold stress at the same time every day. Only a few cycles later, an amazing thing occurred. As if anticipating the cold, the plants started turning on their genes for the cold response before the cold ever hit. This was not a reflex, it was recalled. The plants had prepared by adjusting their internal chemistry and remembering the rhythm of their surroundings and the times when they were uncomfortable. Gene expression, cellular signaling, and dispersed memory. No brain, no neurons. The core of current studies on plant intelligence is that straightforward differentiation between reaction and prediction. A sapling leaning toward the sun is one thing. That is phototropism, a well-researched and understood mechanical reaction to light. However, a plant modifying its behavior in response to an unobserved pattern is a completely different matter. It goes beyond simple sensitivity. It is almost inferential. Furthermore, inference is a cognitive process, even in its most basic form. It entails retaining previous input, contrasting it with present input, and utilizing both to influence subsequent responses. That may seem familiar since animals learn by creating models of their environment and updating them with new information, rather than by making snap decisions. Surprisingly, plants that lack neurons, synapses, and the electrochemical processes we believe are necessary for intelligence appear to be able to do comparable tasks. But where is this occurring if there is no brain? Where does this predictive ability lie in a stem's or leaf's soft tissue? We must alter our perspective on cognition in order to respond to that. Animals have centralized cognitive processes. The brain retains memories in distinct mappable regions, evaluates input, and gives commands. However, there is no such central command in plants, no hub for collecting, classifying, and acting upon signals. Rather, their processing, if we may use that term, is dispersed. Every cell represents a participant. Networks of cells exchange electrical and chemical impulses throughout the plant body. These are not merely local signals. They can change behavior across the entire organism by moving from roots to leaves and back again. Sometimes, even when one leaf is physically unaffected by a stimulus, other sections of the leaf alter as a result. In many respects, decision-making requires this type of internal cooperation. It alludes to integration, not merely perceiving but assessing, not merely responding but making a decision. And sometimes their decisions appear to make sense. Scientists have found that plants are able to balance conflicting alternatives and create risk-reward trade-offs. Think about Arabidopsis thaliana once more. The plant doesn't always retreat or stop growing when exposed to salt in the soil, which can harm roots and make it harder for the plant to absorb water. Rather, it deliberately alters its root growth. The roots may keep spreading into salty areas if the amount of nutrients is sufficient to offset the danger of harm. However, they hold back if the payoff is little. It's not a simple reflex. It is a context-dependent reaction that changes according to both internal and external demands. Without using a single neuron, the plant seems to be able to assess and integrate many types of information and react appropriately to create a sort of cost-benefit analysis. This raises an interesting query. Does a plant have intelligence if it is able to evaluate options and choose a course of action? Or do we not have better terms to describe what it does? The lines become increasingly hazy the further we search. Decision-making, memory, prediction, and combining conflicting signals. These qualities are not only mechanical, they are characteristics of something greater. Furthermore, the notion that plants don't think at all is becoming antiquated, even though they may never think like mammals. However, intelligence, if we may use that term, is more than just perception and judgment. It has to do with communication as well, concerning the exchange of information between several species, or even between components of a system. Furthermore, communication in plants is proving to be much more complex and pervasive than we previously thought. Some of it takes place underground, through chemical transmissions from root to root, signaling molecules, mycorrhizal fungus, and hydraulic changes in the soil, rather than by sight or hearing. For instance, a drought-stricken plant may alert its neighbors, who may then start to close their stomata in anticipation of water stress before the plant itself experiences it. It's astonishing how well they anticipate things. It implies that plants are capable of more than only controlling their internal conditions. They occasionally modify their actions in response to information from other people. These subterranean exchanges can occur over long distances. For instance, in mycorrhizal networks seen in forests, whole tree groups might be connected by the symbiotic connections between fungi and plant roots. Through these networks, resource sharing has been documented by researchers. During times of stress, nutrients were redistributed or carbon was transferred from larger trees to smaller ones. When a tree is hurt or attacked, it occasionally uses the mycorrhizal web to transmit chemical signals to other trees in the area, encouraging them to strengthen their defenses and produce more protective compounds before the threat even reaches them. It functions as a sort of early warning system, a botanical equivalent of the phrase, "watch out, something's coming." But it goes beyond roots and fungus. When herbivores harm plants, they also release volatile organic chemicals, which are messages that are sent through the air. Neighboring plants are able to identify these substances and respond by producing more defensive compounds, such as alkaloids or tannins. In a sense, the plants are listening to each other and watching the breeze for indications of problems. The conventional wisdom that plants are solitary, self-contained entities is called into question by this type of communication, which can be chemical, electrical, or even sonic. Rather, they seem to be a part of intricate networks that are rich in information. Trees don't grow by themselves. It is a part of a social structure, one that reacts, adjusts, and occasionally collaborates. Even whether some species exhibit kin recognition, responding differently to relatives than to unrelated neighbors, has been the subject of some investigation. For instance, in a set of sea rocket plant trials, plants cultivated adjacent to relatives exhibited less aggressive root competition than plants cultivated next to strangers. The plants prioritized cooperation over conflict when allocating resources. This implies not just being aware of one's surroundings, but also having the ability to discriminate, to evaluate, classify, and react according to one's identity. Although it isn't memory in the conventional sense, it suggests a functional analog, a process by which plants alter their behavior in response to their environment and past experiences. Naturally, brain mechanisms, cognitive maps, sensory integration centers, and decision hierarchies frequently support this kind of selective behavior in animals. However, the instruments used in plants are different. Signals move more slowly. Cell walls and vascular tissues allow molecules to communicate with one another. Nevertheless, the result may still seem like a decision. These decisions can sometimes be made by groups of plants working together rather than by individual plants. Collective intelligence at the level of plants. Desert shrubs that time their blossoming according to rainfall are among the most remarkable examples of this. A population of plants coordinates time to ensure that pollinators arrive when they are most required, rather than just one plant reacting to water. The conduct is collective, the signal is dispersed. This concept becomes even more nuanced in the forest. Whole plant communities seem to adjust their behavior according to common information through root grafts, overlapping canopies, and shared mycorrhizal networks. It's dependency, not simply cooperation. One tree's success could depend on the well-being and decisions of numerous others. Subterranean fungi connect the roots of several plants to form these networks, which are frequently referred to as the wood wide web. Trees can exchange signaling chemicals, carbon and nitrogen through them. A neighbor who receives sunlight may give sugars to a seedling that is shadowed. Chemical warnings from a pest-infested tree can cause other plants to strengthen their defenses beforehand. This diffusion isn't random. It is responsive, focused, and frequently reciprocal. Some creatures even seem to be able to discriminate between family members and strangers, sharing resources more favorably with those who are genetically related. Others change how they grow based on who is around them, easing growth close to brothers or aggressively spreading roots toward rivals. We start to notice an additional level of what could be referred to as consciousness in these partnerships, not in terms of personal experience. A tree perceives, but we're not saying it knows in the same sense that we do. It makes a distinction. It alters its behavior for other people as well as for itself. Furthermore, cooperation is not solely mediated by fungi. Ants and certain plants develop close-knit relationships in which the ants provide shelter or nectar in return for the plant's protection. In order to better time their own behavior, some species employ volatile molecules to listen in on surrounding species, such as stress signals or flowering cues. Even parasitic plants, such as daughter vine or cuscuta, are able to identify their preferred hosts by identifying chemical fingerprints prior to physical contact. These instances are difficult to include in our animal-centric theories of cognition. No faces, no movement, no synapses, no brains. However, there is intricacy. There is an option. Information is being collected, analyzed, and used in ways that influence the plant's ability to survive. Remarkably, in deeper, more enigmatic ways, some of this communication even transcends species boundaries. Under some circumstances, damaged plants emit airborne cues that can cause reactions in both close and completely different plants of the same species. For example, an adjacent bean plant may be alerted by a damaged tomato. It is not a linguistic signal. Despite being chemical, it still has meaning. There is danger nearby. It's a clear implication. Language is not necessary for meaning to exist. It is possible to exchange information without a nervous system. Neither wires nor minds can carry these signals. They pass through molecules, diffusion, and a living community's common atmosphere. Nevertheless, the outcome is comparable. A message is sent. There's a message. This leads to a change in behavior. Furthermore, plants have far more complex languages than scientists previously believed. Depending on the type of threat they are facing, certain species can modify the chemicals they produce. When a leaf is chewed by an insect, the plant may produce substances that draw the bug's particular predator. However, the chemical composition changes if a pathogen assaults instead, triggering infection-specific responses. This goes beyond a simple reaction. It's prejudice. The plant is able to recognize the type of threat it is facing and adjust its reaction accordingly. Such selectivity necessitates subtlety. It needs recognition of some kind, a mechanism to process incoming inputs and interpret their meaning. In the field of plant biology, this entails interpreting intricate molecular signals via receptor networks, signal cascades, and hormone regulators. Every leaf, root tube, and bark patch is a component of the system, a node in a dispersed information network that works similarly to a scattered brain. Some researchers have already started drawing comparisons between this technology and primitive computing methods. Of course, not in the digital sense. No binary, no bits, and no processes are present. However, the fundamental function of computation is the conversion of input into output in accordance with a set of rules. These regulations are biochemical in plants. Light, gravity, or the saliva of herbivores are examples of environmental signals that set off exact sequences of chemical events that change an organism's behavior. Additionally, a plant is capable of logic operations, such as if this, then that, just like a computer. Only under certain circumstances do these reactions take place. Some defense genes, for example, are triggered by a combination of stress and light rather than just one of them. This type of conditional reasoning is ingrained in the fundamental structure of plant physiology rather than in circuitry. It moves slowly. Despite being chemical, it is organized, rational, and useful. These logic circuits are also not fixed. Based on prior experiences, plants are able to modify their reactions. Certain pathways are primed by stress, which causes subsequent reactions to be quicker or more severe. In this sense, plants demonstrate a form of learning via altering the threshold at which behaviors are activated rather than by directly altering behavior. Another indicator of intelligence in living systems is the capacity to adjust one's sensitivity, to adjust one's internal processes to better align with the external environment. The way these responses scale is one of the most fascinating features of plant behavior. While a single leaf may produce defense molecules in response to a wound, the same signal might spread from cell to cell and tissue to tissue, activating defenses in distant leaves that were not directly damaged. Similar to how neurons in animals communicate, electrical impulses or waves of calcium ions are frequently used to carry this systemic signaling. However, plant cells are not exclusively specialized for signaling, in contrast to neurons. In addition, they are metabolic workhorses that synthesize chemicals, manage water, and absorb light. The system is made more complex by their dual purpose. The internal network of a plant serves as its life-giving system and communication grid. The signals nevertheless move purposefully despite this complexity. Depending on the kind of stress, different signals go along different pathways and move at different speeds, a few millimeters per second, for example. For example, herbivory causes one pattern of drought and another. Not only does the plant deliver a message, but it also chooses where, how, and what shape to communicate it in. Such specificity suggests something beyond reaction. Internal representation is hinted at. In cognitive science, representation describes a system's capacity to encode the current state of the environment and retain an internal model of the outside world. A plant may be engaging in a type of representation, a biochemical map of the outside world, created not in the mind but in chemistry, when it distinguishes between different factors such as light quality, soil composition, or nearby competitors, and modifies its growth accordingly. Though still debatable, the theory that plants create internal representations of the outside world is becoming more popular, particularly as we find more complex decision-making examples. Corn seedlings were cultivated close to a mechanical fan that came before a light source in one study. The plants eventually grew accustomed to the fan and bowed toward the airflow even when the light was turned off. A fundamental idea in animal psychology is the formation of a prediction association between two unrelated stimuli through associative learning. It serves as the foundation for Pavlov's dogs. It was found in a plant here. Whether these answers satisfy the learning criterion has been questioned by skeptics. However, the prerequisites are obvious from a behavioral perspective. An organism has learned something if it uses the combination of its prior experiences to modify its behavior in the future. In this instance, the corn seedlings exhibited behaviors that implied associative cognition, memory, and anticipation, all without the use of a nervous system. How does this operate then? Once more, the language of cells holds the solution. Through a sophisticated web of hormone messages, electrical impulses, and variations in gene expression, plants control behavior. Each pathway can alter the plant's growth or chemical output in response to particular environmental stimuli, such as light, pressure, temperature, and nutrients. The physiology of the plant gradually encodes its history. One of the most intriguing features of plant behavior is this type of encoding, which stores environmental patterns in physical form. It makes possible what some scholars have dubbed semantic memory. The notion that a plant's biology stores its experiences as a dispersed history across its tissues, rather than in a single location like a brain. For instance, certain plants may modify their stomatal activity in anticipation of dryness if they are repeatedly exposed to it. Those microscopic pores on leaves that control the flow of gases. The altered stomatal pattern may continue even when the moisture returns, suggesting that the plant hedges its bets and recalls the risk. There's more to this than passive carryover. It's an active, controlled alteration that frequently involves epigenetic modifications, in which stress alters gene expression, and these modifications persist long after the stimulus has passed. These changes may even be transferred to the following generation in some situations. In a sort of biological foresight, seeds from stressed plants can occasionally inherit changed response profiles, making the progeny more resilient to the conditions their parents faced. Lamarckian evolution does not apply here. It isn't a mutation in DNA. Through chromatin alteration, short RNAs, and inherited hormone states, transgenerational memory is a more nuanced and adaptable mechanism. The hypothesis that plants have some sort of environmental inheritance, not in the genetic sense of qualities encoded by base pairs, but rather as a type of ecological intelligence passed along by physiological imprinting, has drawn attention from scientists due to the generational transfer of experience. Essentially, a plant's behavior is influenced by its ancestors' experiences, as well as its DNA and immediate environment. The descendants of a lineage that has seen repeated cycles of pest pressure, salt, or drought may develop a sort of baked-in sensitivity to those stresses, changing chemical defenses, growth timing, or root depth correspondingly. These are not conjectures. These are inherited tactics that have been developed throughout time rather than just via DNA. This kind of heredity makes it more difficult to distinguish between instinct and learning. Generally speaking, learned behavior in animals is seen to be unique and gained by first-hand experience. However, the lines are blurred in plants. It casts doubt on conventional evolutionary theories and poses fresh queries about how intelligence might be characterized in systems devoid of consciousness when knowledge endures over generations without changing the DNA. This encourages us to think of a distinct sort of intelligence that arises collectively, not just among cells, but also among animals, rather than being contained in a single mind. For instance, extensive mycorrhizal networks, symbiotic relationships between plant roots and fungi, connect several tree species in forest environments. These networks serve as more than just passive nutrition channels. By sending chemical signals from one tree to another, they can warn nearby trees about disease, drought, or insect attacks. In certain trials, a tree releases warning compounds into the shared network when it is harmed, such as by a pest infestation. Before being assaulted, nearby trees, even those of different species, respond by strengthening their own chemical defenses. The term wood wide web is occasionally used to describe this type of coordinated reaction that involves dozens or even hundreds of separate organisms. However, the selectivity is what's really amazing, not simply the communication. According to studies, trees could give preference to family members or those with whom they have a shared interest. They even appear to provide their own children more carbon or nutrition than their unrelated neighbors in some situations. It's a small but powerful indication that even in plants, competition and cooperation can be balanced with context-aware guidelines rather than mindlessly. This subterranean communications dynamics are much more complex than they seem. Through fungal and root networks, chemical messages are not passively transmitted. They are selectively absorbed or ignored by recipient cells, travel along concentration gradients, and occasionally appear to have their intensity altered based on the sender's health. A distressed tree may send out a more powerful signal, causing its neighbors to react more quickly. In this way, the message's volume can be adjusted based on the circumstances. Furthermore, not every recipient plant reacts in the same manner. The same chemical cue may be interpreted differently by various species and even by individuals of the same species, resulting in subtle differences in root design, growth, and defenses. This implies that the messages are interpretable and filtered through each listener's physiology and past experiences, rather than being generally hard-coded instructions. Our knowledge of plant intelligence is expanded by this layered reactivity. Interpretation is varied, not merely possible. Additionally, there might be an ecological function for this heterogeneity. The same signal may cause various plants in a mixed-species forest to exhibit distinct protective actions. An adjacent alder may increase its tannin production in response to a volatile molecule emitted by a damaged willow, while a spruce may change the time of its bud opening. Every response is tailored not only to the message but also to the recipient's biology and possibly the larger ecological background. Additionally, researchers have found that some of these reactions are dependent on prior exposure. A plant that has already experienced a certain threat might react to the signal more rapidly or powerfully than one that hasn't. It's actually beam primed. Induced resistance is a phenomenon that allows plant defenses to function on a sort of immunological memory, storing and changing such responses over time, in addition to just responding to inputs. We are now getting closer to an exciting frontier. The notion that plant communication is both adaptive and functional. It isn't static. It changes with time. Signaling systems have the potential to improve in efficiency, specificity, and sensitivity to local ecosystem dynamics. Furthermore, if communication is flexible, then plants are actually influencing the languages they use. This refining is considerably more profound in certain species. For example, sagebrush. These plants release a complicated mixture of volatile compounds when they are harmed by herbivores. It is noteworthy, however, that the makeup of those compounds might change based on the type of plants in the area. A somewhat different mixture of compounds is released by a sagebrush surrounded by family members than by one surrounded by strangers, indicating the possibility of personalized signals in addition to kin identification. Even more remarkable is the fact that such tailored messages have a stronger effect on the receiving plants, particularly if they are genetically related. It's a family dialect, not a universal one. It's possible that plants are creating community-specific chemical languages that increase the effectiveness and pertinence of their alerts. This presents a remarkable prospect that plants have evolved context-sensitive and adaptable information exchange systems through evolution and ecological feedback. Systems that convey meaning in addition to mere data. The sender, the recipient, and their past interactions all affect the message. However, what does sharing meaning without a mind entail? In cooperative science, representation, the notion that a system can encode and act upon information about the world, is frequently associated with meaning. This usually incorporates brain patterns, language, or symbols in both humans and animals. However, plants, which are based in chemistry, release a particular mixture of phenol, alkaloids, or terpenes into the atmosphere. These are not merely reactions to stress. These indications are actionable. Nearby plants may be instructed to thicken their cuticle by a certain chemical. Another could accelerate the growth of roots. The molecule contains the message, yet molecules are not isolated entities. It is interpreted by receptors, which are proteins found in plant membranes that attach to particular substances and initiate internal reaction cascades. Hormones such as salicylic acid or jasmonic acid, which are chemical messengers that transmit the signal inside and modify physiology and gene expression, are frequently involved in these cascades. Without a single thought, the message is transmitted, received, deciphered, and retained. The ability to detect, interpret, and respond to volatile signals is a common form of chemical literacy. Airborne communication has been demonstrated by corn, tobacco, tomato, acacia, sage, and dozens of other species. There is life in the air between plants. It's a slow, silent, molecular channel for conversation. As with any communication, context is important. Depending on who receives the chemical, its consequences can vary. A separate species of tomato may completely reject a volatile indication from a wounded tomato plant, whereas another tomato may respond defensively. Depending on prior exposure, even the same species may react differently in some situations. Chemical conditioning sharpens the significance of the signal with experience. So if a plant has before experienced a certain herbivore, it may be poised to react more quickly the next time. There is a reason for this sensitivity. The signaling pathways of plants are intricate networks of receptors, enzymes, and transcription factors that function together like logical gates. Certain paths intensify one another, others impede. Some, such as a mechanical wound and a chemical signature, only become active when several cues are present. In this sense, plants comprehend messages rather than merely detecting them. They are discriminatory. They use context. Surprisingly, this understanding even applies to eavesdropping, which is the unwanted observation of communications from other species. Following mechanical damage, sagebrush plants issued warning volatiles, and surrounding tobacco plants, a completely different species, reacted by increasing their own tea production, according to one set of trials. Defenses. It had come to identify such cues with danger, even though the tobacco wasn't the intended target. It was now able to listen. Some plants go one step farther and adjust their own signals according to the presence of other people, rather than merely listening to them. For example, some species release volatile chemicals in competitive situations that prevent neighboring seeds from germinating. This goes beyond simple defense. It's proactive approach. When resources are scarce, obstructing neighbors' progress turns into an ecological control mechanism. Interestingly, though, this suppression is adjustable. The chemical output may decrease if the neighboring seeds are close relatives, indicating kin-selective behavior that influences community organization as well as growth. A dynamic field of chemical negotiation is produced by the interaction of signal and response. Plants don't have solitary monologues. They participate in a biochemical conversation that is full of alliances, deterrents, cues, and countercues. These relationships can affect which plants collaborate, which dominate, and which wither in the shade of more strategic neighbors, whether in dense forests or weedy grasslands. This chemical language has even been exploited by parasitic species. Cuscuta, the daughter vine, is incapable of photosynthesizing. It needs to cling to a host. However, how does it make its decision? According to research, daughter seedlings are able to recognize volatile signals from many possible hosts and would lean towards some while avoiding others. For example, Doda frequently chooses the more nutrient-dense tomato when given the option between it and wheat. It's not merely expanding without thinking, it's a decision. Choosing a target based on chemical information is a survival-related decision. Furthermore, parasitic plants keep an eye on their hosts long after they have attached, modifying their own growth rate, metabolism, and even when to reproduce in response to the organism's physiological state, from which all of them feed. The parasite may lessen its drain if the host is having trouble in order to prevent death. Uptake may rise if the host is doing well. It's a balancing act, a type of economic behavior controlled by modulation and feedback rather than intent. The fact that so many of these exchanges take place at once only serves to highlight how remarkable they are. In order to evaluate nutritional gradients, water availability, herbivore pressure, and the identities of surrounding neighbors, a single plant may be simultaneously processing dozens of signals. These inputs are not isolated entities. The plant reacts with seeming coherence despite the fact that they are layered, overlapping, and frequently contradictory. The noise doesn't cause it to collapse. It filters. It sets priorities. Some researchers have argued for a larger definition of cognition because of this ability to integrate, sort through complexity, and generate a coordinated response. Cognition is a system's capacity to gather, retain, interpret, and apply information to direct adaptive behavior, not consciousness or subjective experience. With its ability to anticipate, discriminate, remember, and even learn, a plant's dispersed chemical network starts to resemble a peaceful, green mind rather than a passive structure. The plant world becomes both exciting and philosophically hard if we embrace the larger paradigm that intelligence might arise from a system's dynamics rather than being limited to brains. It compels us to re-evaluate our long-held beliefs about what it means to perceive, know, and act purposefully. Furthermore, it raises fresh issues regarding the actual limits of cognition. Recent research, for example, has demonstrated that plants are capable of electrical habituation. Over time, the amplitude of their electrical reactions decreases when they are regularly exposed to harmless stimuli such as gentle touches or modest vibrations. Their reactions become less intense. This type of neural-like attenuation is thought to be an early animal learning mechanism. It is controlled by changes in membrane potential, ion channel function, and calcium signaling in plants. Importantly, it's more than just exhaustion. Selectivity, not depletion, is indicated by the electrical response returning when a fresh stimulus is introduced. The possibility that plants may hear sounds has been investigated by other researchers. Certain acoustic vibrations, such as the gurgling of water in a pipe, have been demonstrated to cause roots to grow toward their source in controlled trials. It is astonishing to think that a plant without ears or a nervous system may nonetheless hear and react to sound. However, the evidence points to actual pressure wave sensitivity. The plant can use sound as another clue in its growing environment because tiny mechanosensors in the root cells seem to convert vibrations into electrochemical impulses. Sound is just one frontier too. Additionally, plants respond to electromagnetic signals in ways that scientists are only learning about. According to some research, plants may be able to sense weak magnetic fields, like those produced by the Earth's geomagnetic field, and adjust their cellular functions or growth direction accordingly. Although the exact mechanisms are still up for debate, several theories include the use of magnetically sensitive proteins, such as cryptochromes, which may act as a biological compass in addition to mediating light responses. If this proves to be accurate, it would imply that plants move through unseen fields of force that extend over the Earth, in addition to through soil and light. Plants have a remarkable situational awareness due to their multimodal sensitivity to light, gravity, water, chemicals, sound, and maybe magnetism. The way they incorporate these inputs, however, is even more impressive. One signal at a time is not all that plants react to. They are synthesized. They set priorities. They might prioritize root growth over leaf growth if light is plentiful but water is limited. In the event that light and temperature give conflicting signals, the plant chooses. These aren't pre-programmed automatic reactions. They are conditional behaviors that are weighted. The plant is adjusting its internal state, selecting different strategies, and weighting variables. Plant hormones and chemical messengers such as auxin, gibberellin, cytokinin, abscisic acid, and ethylene are used in part for this coordination. Depending on context, location, and level of concentration, each has a variety of impacts. Auxin, for instance, suppresses root growth while encouraging stem cell elongation. It moves through tissues in a specific direction, forming gradients that influence a plant's branching, bending, and even the formation of new organs. Hormonal signaling in plants functions similarly to animal neurotransmission, albeit more slowly and without synapses. Signals travel over space, are detected by receptors, and set off a series of biochemical and genetic alterations. According to some researchers, These vast networks of common chemical cues and resource flow, as well as collective responsiveness, might be more than just a network for communication. It might qualify as dispersed intelligence. Not a mind, not even a brain, but a system that stores and processes environmental information in ways that no single plant could. This concept is testable, in addition to being philosophical. Plants lose their capacity to predict stress, plan flowering, or transfer nutrients when portions of these networks are disturbed, such as when the mycorrhizal fungi are eliminated. The network seems to be a working entity in and of itself. When the system is damaged, intellect wanes. This calls into question what we consider to be an individual. Identity is more pliable in the realm of plants. Boundaries are hazy. Trees are more than just trees. It is a node in a dynamic web that is influenced by and shapes other people's actions. Its memories could be stored in fungus, hormones, or the tips of roots. Neighbors influenced its decisions. Its tenacity is shared. And if that sounds strange, consider this. Individual neurons in our own brains are not sentient. One synapse has no knowledge. However, when combined, they create thought through trillions of connections. The forest might be experiencing something similar. Although each plant and fungal thread is only one component, they work together to create a dynamic system, detecting, responding, and adjusting. This does not imply that woods have the same thought processes as humans. Information is being processed, but there is no one stream of consciousness or focal awareness. Experience is integrated. Whole communities can occasionally learn from one another. Furthermore, the underlying mechanisms are not supernatural. They are testable, ecological, and biochemical. A new understanding of intelligence starts to take shape as researchers continue to examine these connections. It is not restricted to neurons, movement, or even people. An intelligence that is slow, silent, and profoundly ingrained. One that passes through soil and sap instead of speech and thought. One thing we are just starting to notice. Our understanding of plants and intelligence in general is evolving as a result of this expanded perspective on cognition as dispersed, emergent, and rooted in physiology. It implies that intelligence might be a range of mechanisms by which living systems adapt to complexity rather than just a characteristic of brains. And in that context, plant actions that were previously written off as passive, automated, or solely genetic acquire new meaning. They are molded by past experiences, adjusted by feedback, impacted by neighbors, and frequently display the same characteristics that we use to characterize animal cognition: memory, learning, decision-making, and adaptation. Naturally, the timescales at which these processes take place vary. Neither the quickness of a fly nor the slyness of a primate can match the reaction of a plant. It makes gradual judgments that are based on the sun and rain cycles and the cadence of the seasons, but they are nonetheless decisions. Furthermore, simplicity is not the same as slowness. The way this research reframes the idea of problem-solving is among its most remarkable ramifications. According to conventional cognitive science, issue-solving necessitates knowledge of an objective, the roadblocks to that objective, and the solution. However, we are starting to observe variations of this in plants as well. Maybe deprived of consciousness, but not of strategy. Think about climbing plants that need to find a support structure to get higher. They run the risk of starvation and shadow if they don't have one. How do they locate it then? The practice of circummutation is used by certain species, such as morning glory and pea plants. As they grow, their stems move slowly in a spiral pattern. This isn't arbitrary. In order to maximize the likelihood of contact, the trajectory is frequently modified in response to adjacent surfaces. The plant will skew its growth in the direction of any surrounding poles or branches if it finds them. Its tendrils coil around the support to start climbing as soon as contact is achieved. What occurs prior to contact, however, is the intriguing aspect. According to certain experiments, climbing plants seem to more effectively target their growth when a support is close by, as though they are aware of it before they come into contact with it. Cues could be subtle variations in light, humidity, or volatile substances. Additionally, the coiling motion tightens after a support is found, a feedback-driven improvement that makes it possible for the plant to cling more firmly. Some researchers have even suggested that this type of behavior satisfies the minimal requirements for tool use, not in the sense of producing an object, but rather in recognizing and taking advantage of an aspect of the air environment in order to accomplish a goal. The plant changes its shape to utilize the support structure as a tool for accessing sunlight. This raises more profound issues with perception in general. How can a plant detect the presence of a pole nearby? It has no eyes. It has no ears. Nevertheless, it creates a rough but useful map of its surroundings via variations in light, airflow, or chemical diffusion. Passive sensing is not that. Environmental modeling is what that is. And it goes farther. Some carnivorous plants, such as bladderworts and Venus flytraps, have to discriminate between the movement of their prey and sporadic environmental disruptions. If two distinct hairs are not touched within a short period of time, a Venus flytrap will not close. Raindrops and falling leaves are less likely to waste energy because of this mechanism. It resembles a logical gate. Close if A and B happen in X seconds. It goes beyond simple detection. Conditional processing is a type of temporal reasoning that is ingrained in leaf tissue, and the Venus flytrap isn't the only one. Consider Utricularia, an aquatic bladderwort. This small carnivorous plant creates molecular traps in the water, which are bladder-like structures with a flexible entrance that stay under negative pressure. In less than a millisecond, the door opens and the prey is drawn inside when tiny aquatic organisms rub against trigger hairs close to the aperture. Here's the catch, though. This mechanism is not activated by every movement of the plant. Similar to the Venus flytrap, certain requirements must be fulfilled. A precisely balanced set of temporal and mechanical inputs. Furthermore, once activated, the trap doesn't reset until internal pressure is restored, which requires energy. This system is incredibly fast, highly selective, and energy efficient, all from a plant that lacks muscles, neurons, and any kind of traditional awareness. What is the boundary then? If a system has the ability to recognize stimuli, differentiate between different kinds, store information over time, and only take action when a predetermined set of circumstances is satisfied, doesn't that constitute cognition, even if it is constructed via cell walls and water pressure as opposed to electricity and synapses? Plants that alter their behavior in response to social context, changing their growth or reproduction strategies based on who is nearby, are even more remarkable. If closely related individuals are present, several species postpone blossoming, which lessens pollinator competition. Some people become more protective when they are around strangers, which may be a form of social prejudice. It's a world of silent calculations and impulsive decisions, yet still subject to information, goals, and criteria. Experiments investigating the complexity of these computations have started in recent years. Consider the rare Chilean vine known as Bocala trifoliolata. This plant has a wonderful ability. In order to resemble the leaves of the plant it is climbing, it modifies their size, shape, and color. Bucela produces small, spherical leaves if the host has them. Bria imitates the host if its leaves are lobed or jagged. The fact that Bucela mimics more than one host species is astounding. It can change its morphology to fit a wide range of neighbors. If it shifts hosts, it can even change the shape of its leaves. It accomplishes this without making physical contact. The presence of airborne cues, potentially chemical signals, or even recognition of light patterns is suggested by the fact that in several trials, vines that were not in direct contact with the host nonetheless changed their leaves to match. It is challenging to classify this capacity to evaluate the form of another plant and then alter one's own to correspond with it. It's not a reflex. It incorporates several sensory inputs, is dynamic, and depends on the context. Put otherwise, it appears to be rather similar to perception. More interestingly, it seems that bouquet mimicry is adaptive. The vine may evade herbivores who ignore it as merely another element of the landscape by integrating itself with its host. It's camouflage, but in a botanical sense rather than the animal one that involves concealment and movement. Identity concealment by means of morphological flexibility. The fact that this replication doesn't appear to be hard-coded is much more startling. It's not a fixed characteristic triggered by a single environmental stimulus. It's fluid. Study it. A living plant's body plan changes according to the people and appearance of those around it. According to some theories, Bokria's mimicry might be based on some form of visual perception or, at the very least, the ability to recognize light patterns that vary based on the neighboring leaves' structural makeup. If this is accurate, then certain plants are able to understand the spatial features of the light environment in ways that resemble approximation vision in addition to their well-known ability to detect light intensity and direction. The observation of spatial patterns of light and dark is the broadest definition of vision. Eyes are not necessary for it. A plant is actually perceiving form if it can detect the shadows, reflectance, and geometry of the leaves of a nearby plant, and then modify its own tissues to match. Through light-responsive cells dispersed over its surface, rather than a nervous system. This is not a unique instance. The Venus flytrap is one example of a carnivorous plant that uses precise timing and mechanical feedback to discriminate between genuine prey and accidental contact. The leaf's inner hairs must be brushed twice in around 20 seconds to cause a trap closure, a defense against squandering energy on erroneous alerts caused by falling objects or precipitation. Memory is implied by that temporal requirement. Calcium gradients and electrical charge within the leaf store a short-term biochemical record of past events, not long-term memory. The temporal discrimination of other plants is comparable. Common nettles stinging hairs, Echidea, do not release their chemical defenses until specific thresholds are reached. The plant does more than merely react. After waiting and weighing, it responds to accumulated cues. This type of action is similar to how neurons add up information before firing. Here, however, the logic is occurring in epidermal cells and vascular tissue rather than synapses. These examples collectively imply that many plants pass the world rather than merely registering it. They don't simply develop away from danger or toward opportunity. They use delicate multimodal information about their environment to evaluate, compare, and in some situations, adjust in very particular ways. Many scientists are still cautious despite all the facts we have seen thus far. The bar of proof is considerable, after all, if we are to assert that plants display cognition-like abilities. Because of this, the focus of plant intelligence research has switched to controlled studies that can assess learning over time, isolate cause and effect, and test for adaptability across shifting graphs. A study on pea plants cultivated inside Y-shaped labyrinths provides one example. In these configurations, researchers connected one arm of the maze to a little breeze, and then shortly after, they introduced light through the same arm. The plants eventually started to associate the breeze with incoming light, bending toward it even when the light was removed after several trials. An essential component of animal adaptive behavior, associative memory formation, is suggested by this type of Pavlovian response. Additionally, breeze and light separated when the experiment was reversed. As a result, the behavior altered. The plants had not just responded mindlessly, they had changed their contingent expectation. Other scientists experimented with how plants reacted to mechanical simulation and spatial awareness. An overhead support beam that the bean plants could eventually reach and wrap around was used in one trial. However, scientists carefully repositioned the beam before contact was established. The ascending stems changed their development arcs, suggesting target monitoring, and reoriented toward the displaced support rather than continuing on their original course. It appeared as though the plant had created a model of its movement as well as the location of the support, forming a sort of spatial map. Naturally, the extent to which these comparisons can be applied is limited. It's possible that what we refer to as learning in plants differs from learning in animals in terms of mechanism. The hippocampus and neurotransmitters that store associative patterns are absent. However, there are clear behavioral similarities. Responses from plants can occasionally satisfy the same standards as those applied to research on animal cognition. Sensitization, discrimination, generalization, habituation, and even reversal learning, which is the process of undoing an association that has been learned and replacing it with a new one. In particular, the latter is frequently seen as a powerful indicator of cognitive flexibility. Additionally, some plants seem to pass it in properly crafted conditions. The signals in plants travel through various media and on different timescales than we are accustomed to, which contributes to the difficulty of this research. Animal behavior happens in a matter of seconds. Hours may pass before plants behave. It takes time, accuracy, and the capacity to discern between growth patterns that are purely mechanical and those that are adaptive to measure change. To track behavior with fine resolution, contemporary research frequently uses time-lapse imaging, gene expression markers, and specially designed habitats. These instruments have uncovered minute changes in hormone release, root patterning, and leaf angle that would have gone undetected only a few decades ago. Additionally, a new form of scientific language is evolving as a result of these investigations, one that avoids anthropomorphizing cognitive phenomena in its description. Scholars discuss dispersed sensory integration, non-neural computing, information processing, and plasticity. Despite their abstract nature, these phrases reflect a conscious effort to characterize plant activity according to its own standards, by knowing what it is, rather than by equating it with the actions of animals. A distinct type of responsiveness with physiological roots that goes beyond our current definition of intelligence. Research on root navigation has produced some of the most interesting trials. In one scenario, researchers placed seedlings at the edge of a complicated underground obstacle course that included tunnels, nutrient pockets, and a matrix of artificial soil. The roots didn't develop mindlessly over time. They looked about. They prodded, hesitated, pulled back, and roared. In certain experiments, roots even favored routes that went to nutrient-rich zones rather than low-reward dead ends. They did not expand linearly. It was inquisitive and contingent, as though every root tip were a sensory organ and a decision-maker combined. The exceptional sensitivity of roots lends credence to the notion that they engage in cognitive foraging. A sprouting root's very tip is teeming with receptors. Gravity, wetness, pressure, chemical gradients, and even the existence of living things nearby can all be detected by it. The root doesn't simply end when the path in front of you is obstructed. It flexes, it makes another attempt, and it commits if it discovers a more viable path. Without a central control system, cellular signals, calcium waves, auxin gradients, and membrane potentials coordinate decentralization to produce this adaptable behavior. The idea of the root brain is among the most intriguing hypotheses to come out of this work. Not an actual brain, mind you. This place is devoid of neurons. However, there is an area at the root's tip where responses are triggered, movement is guided, and sensory input is combined. The capacity of movement in plants was originally the subject of speculation by Charles Darwin, who wrote that the root apex functions similarly to the brain of lower animals. These days, scientists are taking that metaphor seriously, not to suggest that plants have animal-like minds, but to acknowledge that complex processing can occur even when neurons are not present. Interest in root AES, especially the transition zone, a slender area between the meristem and elongation zones, has increased as a result of this root-brain theory. In this case, cells are very active in electrical signaling, exhibiting membrane potential and ion flow spikes that resemble brain activity. According to some researchers, this zone might serve as a sort of command center that is sufficiently integrative, not centralized, to coordinate choices about growth direction, nutrient prioritizing, and even avoidance behavior. Damage to this area causes the plant to exhibit unpredictable exploring activity, as if its sense of direction has been impaired. The intricacy of these answers isn't the only thing that stands out, though. They are malleable. Root behavior in laboratory settings differs not just across species, but also between individuals. Even when two genetically identical seedlings are raised in the same conditions, they may yet make distinct decisions. That fluctuation is not noise. It implies a sort of stochastic approach, an inherent adaptability that raises the chances of success in uncertain situations. This is known as bet hedging in ecology, dividing up the danger among several tactics to gradually increase survival. It is a miracle of evolutionary engineering that plants appear to be able to achieve this without having a brain, knowledge, or control over where their seeds fall. The concept of probabilistic strategy is actually present throughout the kingdom of plants. For instance, even in the identical conditions, various species will germinate seeds at varying speeds. Some seeds wait, while others sprout right away. It's not an error. It's insurance. At least some kids might have timed it correctly if things go wrong, like a late frost or an unexpected drought. Surprisingly, this time is frequently inherited. Generations of selection can fine-tune a gene's propensity to germinate early or late. Without giving it any conscious thought, the plant is essentially programming a strategy that strikes a balance between risk and reward. This ability to strategically differ among and between generations suggests something more profound than a simple response. It offers a framework for adaptive behavior, a method of dealing with uncertainty that is neither totally random nor inflexible. And this adaptability includes form in addition to development and timing. Depending on factors like light, wind, crowding, or even the presence of herbivores, certain plants can change their branching structure, leaf shape, or stem thickness. In certain instances, a plant that grows in windier environments will mechanically optimize its architecture for life, by producing thicker stems and shorter internodes. There isn't a clear plan. A conditional blueprint is what it is. This is also seen in climbing plants. A tendril does not just wrap mindlessly when it comes into contact with a surface. Depending on what it discovers, it tests, investigates, and modifies tension. Certain species are even able to discriminate between different kinds of support, rough versus smooth, rigid versus flexible, and modify their grip in response. Specialized cells that react to touch and pressure provide this precise mechanical input that is modified in real time. Although they have a similar function, these are not nerves, converting outside stimuli into particular local actions. Additionally, in certain situations, that behavior may change the plant's overall growth pattern. Plant parasites like dodder are one of the most striking instances. A daughter seedling flies through the air in slow arcs after germinating. Circummutation, which is the act of looking for a host. However, this movement isn't arbitrary. According to studies, the daughter will bend preferentially toward favorite hosts and is able to detect chemical cues in the air from neighboring plants. It assesses the connection's quality after contact is established. The daughter might separate and attempt again in a different location if the host is undernourished or well protected. The complexity of this plant extends beyond host identification. It not only searches but also selects. According to certain research, the identity of the host can affect the daughter's gene expression, adjusting its parasitic approach to the plant it is feeding on's defenses or nutritional value. Conditional exploitation is what this is. There is more to a parasitic plant than passive leaching. It involves detecting, assessing, and modifying. And it accomplishes this without a brain, eyes, or ears. Simply a set of tools that combine genetic plasticity, mechanical feedback, and chemical perception to address a very particular biological problem: how to live on the body of another person. Parasites are not the only ones that exhibit this behavior. Researchers have discovered surprising forms of spatial awareness in plants that are not parasitic. Anticipatory reaching is the ability of certain climbing species to grow toward neighboring supports before making contact, modifying the course in response to perceived orientation and proximity. In a set of pea plant trials, researchers positioned vertical poles close to the plant's probing tendrils. Even before they touched the poles, the peas started to change the direction of their growth. Additionally, the plants reoriented when the poles were moved, not immediately but consciously, as though they were adjusting their picture of the surrounding area. Because it develops so gradually, this type of spatial modeling is very remarkable. Growth is not typically thought of as behavior. However, growth is behavior if behavior is defined as an active, context-dependent change in state. Furthermore, that growth starts to resemble a form of embodied problem-solving as it responds to changing conditions, bending, stopping, accelerating, or retreating in response to new information. Perhaps not conscious, but a method of aligning internal processes with outward form, a structured reaction to structure. Every root and shoot becomes a slow-motion theory in this perspective. What if I develop in this manner? What if I give that a try? Additionally, plants react to more than only external structures. As they develop, they also appear to evaluate and improve their own form. Think about the arrangement of leaves on a stem or branch. Pilot taxis, a precise mathematical spacing that maximizes light collection while reducing self-shading, are seen in several animals. These configurations frequently adhere to golden angle distributions or Fibonacci spirals, which maximize efficiency to a level comparable to that of constructed solar arrays. This pattern, however, is not hard-coded. It is emergent. It results from internal hormonal impulses, chemical gradients, and feedback between developing cells, all of which dynamically adapt as the plant grows. It now seems that even root architecture, which was once thought to be controlled by basic tropisms like moisture and gravity, is subject to far more intricate regulation. Nutrients are just followed mindlessly by roots. Depending on internal food requirements, competitive pressure, and previous interaction, they branch, bifurcate, and reorient. In order to maximize territory, several roots from the same plant frequently avoid overlapping while approaching the same piece of soil. However, depending on species, kinship, and context, the technique may change when encountering roots from an adjacent plant, sometimes avoiding them and other times outcompeting them. Unbeknownst to us, the root system is continuously navigating an invisible map that is influenced by both measurement and memory. The idea that roots might have some sort of tactile discernment has even been investigated in several trials. When sand, gravel, clay, and other materials with varying textures are present, roots will frequently favor one over the other based on mechanical input rather than just nutrient content. Their capacity to sense their way through the earth allows them to choose roots that strike a balance between access, permeability, and stability. Additionally, scientists have seen coordinated allocation techniques in split-root setups, where a plant's roots are separated into several compartments with varying circumstances. While the other half of the root system stays back, the other half may investigate a nutrient trick zone. The strategy can then be reversed if the environment changes. The decision is the result of dispersed intelligence acting in the dark and localized sensing. This flexibility is also evident in the way that plants control their internal chemical economies. The enormous variety of molecules produced beyond the necessities of growth and reproduction, known as secondary metabolites, are not created randomly. Alkaloids, terpenes, phenolics, and other compounds having functions in defense, attraction, signaling, and stress response are among them. Frequently, with amazing specificity, plants adjust the synthesis of these compounds in response to changing environmental conditions. When one kind of caterpillar attacks a tomato plant, it may increase a particular set of alkaloids, but another bug causes a totally other profile. This customized biochemistry demonstrates a sort of diagnostic capacity, the capacity to identify harm, categorize it, and react with the proper molecular instruments. These chemical choices are also frequently cost-balanced. Energy that could be used for growth, reproduction, or root expansion is used to produce defensive compounds. The plant must make a decision. Should it wait or make an investment in protection now? Should resources be allocated to one leaf or the other? Naturally, these are not deliberate decisions, but they are functional analogues of resource budgeting, and they vary according to context, history, and anticipated needs. Even if the immediate threat has passed, a plant that has previously been assaulted may prime its chemistry, creating substances more quickly the next time. This implies that plants remember the past and plan for the future, in addition to measuring the threat that exists right now. Furthermore, this biological insight can be remarkably subtle. Certain species are able to discriminate between insect feeding and mechanical damage by detecting not only the presence of herbivores, but also their saliva. Others are able to distinguish between touch from bug paws or climbing vines and touch from rainfall. In each instance, the reaction is targeted modulation rather than generic reactivity. An internal system that can encode and compare a dispersed network that operates with rules and logic but lacks consciousness is necessary for that degree of discernment. It may not have human-like thought processes, but it does have structured perception. This ability to respond based on rules has led some researchers to use concepts from cybernetics and systems theory to characterize plant behavior as a type of distributed computation, rather than just a biological phenomenon. According to this theory, the plant is a dynamic information processor that continuously modifies its internal state in response to a variety of inputs. It does this by modifying behavior through intercellular signaling, chemical feedback loops, and epigenetic regulation. Although it doesn't make decisions as the brain does, it integrates information to resolve uncertainty, which is essentially computation. Plant circadian rhythms are among the most striking illustrations of this. Internal biological clocks, which are molecular mechanisms that measure time regardless of light exposure, are present in almost all plants. These clocks enable plants to synchronize blooming, leaf movement, or chemical synthesis to correspond with the rhythms of the day, as well as to predict sunrise and sunset and modify photosynthesis accordingly. These aren't light-related reactions. They are predictions. Even in complete darkness, plants use molecular oscillators made up of transcription factors, feedback loops, and power to regulate their internal functions on an approximately 24-hour cycle. Circuitry of genes. Plants have strong, adaptable circadian clocks that can be entrained to synchronize with environmental cues such as light and temperature. However, they are also self-sufficient and have the ability to run independent cycles. A proper internal clock must have that characteristic. It reacts to more than simply the outside world. It keeps track of time on its own and only modifies its rhythm in response to outside cues. A complex type of self-regulation, the capacity to entrain, anticipate, and correct timing abnormalities, verges on what cognitive scientists could refer to as temporal modeling. In recent years, researchers have started to question how much a plant's overall behavior is influenced by this temporal modeling. Could a plant predict the arrival of pollinators or seasonal changes if it can predict dawn? What shape does that anticipation take, if any? Some species seem to employ photoperiod, or the relative lengths of day and night, to regulate the expression of genes involved in defense, growth, and reproduction, in addition to timing flowering. The plant's internal time model interprets the shift in daylight as a cue rather than a trigger. Although it is still debatable, the theory that plants create models of space, time, and contingency is consistent with mounting evidence that plants are more than passive environmental filters. They interpret actively. They also need to have an internal reflection of the outside world, just like any interpreter. A sort of internal mirror that is dispersed across tissues formed by memories and encoded in chemistry. It isn't a metaphor. Biochemistry with representational qualities is what it is. According to some academics, the fundamental component of cognition is the capacity to foresee, integrate, prioritize, and model the environment. Not consciousness, not sentience, not feeling, but reasoning. If a biological system can collect data, weigh trade-offs, and modify its behavior in adaptive ways, it may nonetheless be intelligent even if it lacks a brain. And by that criterion, plants, slow, silent, and rooted, may rank among the planet's most underappreciated intelligences. However, a new dilemma emerges if we acknowledge that plants are capable of computation, modeling, prediction, and action. Is it possible to model these systems? If true, what may we discover by converting a plant's logic into a machine's logic? In recent years, scientists studying artificial intelligence and bio-inspired robots have begun using plants as design models as well as research participants. Their adjustable thresholds, decentralized decision-making, and integration of dependable, but slow signals. These are not merely peculiarities of biology. They are tactics, and they might provide useful models for creating more resilient, strong types of intelligence. One team of researchers created robotic tendrils that detect and react to touch after being inspired by climbing plants. There is no preset course for these soft robots to follow. Rather, they respond to environmental stimuli by modifying growth-like extensions, curling toward supports, dodging obstacles, and maximizing grip with the least amount of energy. The algorithms that control these behaviors are directly inspired by distributed processing, local sensing, plant physiology, and the ongoing feedback loop between environment and action. Basically, they don't move, they grow. Systems that simulate root growth were developed by another team. Instead of spreading randomly, these robotic roots follow simulated gradients of chemical information to find nutrients in artificial soil. Based on local feedback, the robot chooses which branch to grow next using a network of basic operations. Movement is not dictated by a central controller or CPU. Like in plants, the intelligence is emergent and dispersed throughout the system. The end effect is a computer that solves issues more like a root than an animal would. These designs are more than just ingenious innovations. The fact that the laws regulating plant behavior, slowness, decentralization, adaptability, and resource efficiency may apply to artificial systems just as well as to biological ones is something they profoundly underline. In domains where autonomy is crucial and rapid communication isn't always feasible, such as swarm robotics, disaster response, or deep space exploration, plant-like tactics may provide a subtle form of resilience that relies on slow, cumulative sensing rather than quick reactions, and on judgments that are in tune with the situation rather than rash. Even plant-based computation is being investigated by certain researchers. They are investigating the possibility of using actual plants or plant tissues as computer substrates in place of silicon circuits. In one study, researchers took advantage of the inherent electrical characteristics of lettuce seedlings to create biological logic gates. They showed basic logic operations and/or not by detecting outputs and applying weak voltages. Although it is basic, it implies that even living things devoid of neurons are capable of processing information and generating output that is based on clear rules. Why is this important? Because it compels us to define intelligence more broadly. For most of human history, thinking has been associated with speed, intricacy, and the glimmer of electricity passing through brain tissue. However, plants encourage us to think about an alternative model, one that is patient, modular, and sluggish, one that uses growth patterns and epigenetic changes rather than neurons to encode memory, one that might turn out to be both technologically and biologically beneficial. Today, some of the most fascinating areas of plant research focus on what plants might teach us in addition to what they can already do. Because despite how odd it may sound, the architecture of artificial intelligence is starting to take inspiration from plant behavior. Conventional artificial intelligence AI systems are based on animal brain models, with node networks mimicking neurons and learning from data via reward and feedback. However, that is just one method of information processing. A completely new blueprint is provided by plants. They have a dispersed, decentralized design that allows them to sense, determine, coordinate, and remember without the need for neurons or centralized control. Distributed sensing with local decision-making is a methodology that has begun to impact some areas of artificial intelligence, particularly in swarm robots and edge computing. What if we could manage a system without a central processor? is the question that engineers are posing. What if every robot, node, and sensor could function more like a separate plant cell that yet contributes to the whole? Resilience is provided by this decentralized model. A plant doesn't die if one of its leaves falls off. Other roots can make up for damaged ones. Similar to this, a system with architecture inspired by plants may be more resilient to faults, able to adjust to shifting conditions, root around broken parts, and carry on even in the face of extreme stress. Some scientists are even creating soft-growing robots that resemble plants and alter their shape in reaction to their environment. These are not animal-like robots. As they investigate, they extend and anchor themselves, growing like vines. Their activity is controlled by local factors like light, moisture, and barriers, rather than by orders from above. Growth, not locomotion, is the foundation of this new paradigm for movement and adaptation. Furthermore, the way that plants handle complexity is gaining attention outside of robotics. Millions of leaves are managed by a single tree, and each one reacts to water, light, and temperature. Overall, nevertheless, the tree remains balanced. Such hierarchical coordination from individual unit to collective function may help guide the development of robust and adaptive scalable AI systems. All of this has a philosophical component as well. We are faced with a fundamental question as artificial intelligence grows in strength. What is considered intelligent? Our standards were based on logical deduction, language proficiency, chess skill, and human intellect for many years. However, because of their unique environment, plants function outside of these frameworks, not because they are less valuable. Their intelligence, if we can call it that, is scattered, embodied, sluggish, and intricately linked to their surroundings. Furthermore, this plant-like intelligence might have more bearing on our future than we realize. Simulating human minds isn't necessarily the aim when integrating AI into physical systems, driverless cars, adaptive architecture, and environmental monitoring. The goal is to create systems that can function well under pressure, sense without looking, react without moving, adapt, persevere, and optimize, even in situations when centralized control is not feasible. As a result, interest in so-called plant-inspired computers has increased. A new area of study where scientists create innovative algorithms and machine intelligence architectures by using biological techniques found in plants. For instance, swarm systems and robotics, where no single node controls the entire system but intelligence arises from the sundial, can benefit from distributed sensing and control, which is a defining feature of plant behavior. Interactions between numerous basic components. This enables decentralized decision-making in plants. Although root tips explore on their own, they chemically exchange information. It refers to swarms of robots that may investigate ecosystems or catastrophe areas without a leader. In a similar vein, scientists are looking into how plants encode memory in epigenetic patterns and how those patterns can guide the development of new machine learning models for long-term learning. Plant star memory is robust, adaptive, and integrated into the structure itself, in contrast to standard memory storage, which is explicit and centralized. Data alone isn't enough. Experience has changed its behavior, negating the necessity for central control or digital storage. Not all of these are metaphors. They are functional models. Algorithms for plant root growth have been employed by researchers in one field to address optimization issues, similar to figuring out the quickest route around a maze via concurrent exploration of a field of possibilities and reinforcement of successful paths, rather than by computing every possible outcome. This type of trial-and-error learning imitates evolution rather than reason, and it's effective. The similarities don't end with behavior either. Some scientists are going one step further and investigating the possibility of creating completely new types of artificial intelligence out of plant elements. Plant-based biohybrid systems are based on this concept. These are experimental technologies that combine biological adaptability and machine accuracy by integrating electronic components with living plants to generate sensors, processors, or communication networks. For example, plants' tissues can be used as environmental sensors, since they naturally react to light, touch, humidity, and pollutants. Their sensitivity to changes can match or even exceed that of devices manufactured by humans. For instance, one experiment detected airborne poisons by measuring a plant's fluctuating electrical resistance. The physiology of the plant changed slightly but noticeably in response to specific compounds. The plant became a sort of living circuit when these changes were transformed into data by electrodes affixed to the leaves. With a little assistance from technology, biology accomplishes what it does naturally, without the need for batteries or artificial inputs. Our understanding of intelligence itself is starting to change as a result of the intersection of machine learning and plant biology. What else may be considered a mind if the brain is not necessary for cognition, and if information can be processed slowly and chemically in a decentralized manner? The minimum cognition framework is one that some theorists have put forth. The notion that there is a spectrum of cognition and that the fundamental components of intelligent behavior may be seen in even the most basic systems. According to this perspective, a brain, consciousness, or even neurons are not necessary for a system to be deemed intelligent. It is the capacity to gather, store, process, and react to information in ways that improve efficiency or survival. A plant that can perceive, integrate, and modify behavior based on prior experiences and even communicate with others may be considered a minimally cognitive agent by that description. Although it wouldn't know in the same sense as humans, it would take part in something related, a dispersed awareness that is based on the body and is influenced by input and context. It creates an intriguing potential. Perhaps we have been viewing cognition too narrowly if memory can exist without a mind and intelligence can arise without neurons. That notion must be like our own, we've assumed. This awareness needs to be internal, consolidated, quick, and mobile. However, nature might be providing us with a far more expansive definition, one in which mind is a process rather than a place, a steady, continuous unfolding rather than a spark. This more expansive perspective does more than simply broaden the definition of cognition. It challenges us to completely reconsider how we relate to other living things. From this angle, plants are more than just landscape, just on a timetable and in a language we've only just started to understand. They are active members of their surroundings who are always conversing, solving problems, and making decisions. It also calls into question how we distinguish between artificial and living systems. The behaviors of plants, such as slow sensing, dispersed control, and adaptive response, are serving as models for the development of more robust, adaptable, and sustainable machines, as scientists create new types of synthetic biology and plant-inspired robotics. In certain instances, engineers are creating circuits that process information chemically rather than electronically, or soft robotics that resemble root development, all influenced by the way plants survive without moving. Furthermore, plant biology is posing fresh queries regarding the embodiment of intelligence in the field of artificial intelligence. Is a system still intelligent if it doesn't use centralized processing? Can networks that develop instead of compute produce intelligence? These questions are not limited to gardens or forests. They are relevant to our own technology's future. New areas of study are already being shaped by these questions. For instance, in bio-inspired computing, scientists are starting to create information systems that use parallel distributed networks that react in real time to environmental context, processing data more like plants do. Instead of using algorithms to solve problems, some systems even use live elements, such as slime molds or artificial root-like structures. Replicating human intelligence is not the aim. Its purpose is to investigate alternative models or ways of thinking that come from embodiment, receptivity, and evolution rather than from brains or logic. In this way, plants are more than just research objects. They work together to rethink intelligence in a more comprehensive way. Mind philosophers have also taken note. The emergence of research on plant cognition has reignited curiosity about what it means to be a thinking entity. Our definitions must shift if learning may take place without consciousness, and intelligence is not dependent on the brain. Nowadays, some intellectuals support a framework that is more inclusive, one that views cognition as a spectrum or even a multidimensional space with various types of minds occupying different parts, rather than as a binary, either you have it or you don't. This distributed intelligence is beginning to stimulate new ideas even in artificial systems. Plant biology engineers and computer scientists have started to take inspiration from this decentralized method of problem solving. They investigate how behavior could arise from thousands of basic communicating units, each processing a little amount of crude information and sending signals onward, as opposed to creating centralized control systems like standard neural networks. These methods, which are frequently referred to as plant-inspired computation, are a part of an expanding movement to completely rethink artificial intelligence. What if we created machines that think more like forests than like the brain, with its strict hierarchies and fast-firing synapses? Systems that develop, adjust, and react contextually, not quickly, but deeply. Not just by reason, but by experience gained from a wide range of sources. Surprisingly, some of the methods used to simulate plant intelligence are now being incorporated back into biology. Researchers are discovering hitherto unknown rhythms in plant development with the aid of AI systems trained on plant imaging data, such as time-lapse root movement or cellular growth patterns. Secret pulses, chemical signaling cycles, and behavioral patterns that would have been impossible for a human observer to pick up on due to lack of patience or perspective. It's a subtle irony. Machines designed to look like humans are now assisting us in deciphering organisms that are completely different from us. Perhaps they're also assisting us in redefining what intelligence actually means in the process. We have distinguished clearly between animals and plants, mind and substance, and thinkers and non-thinkers for generations. However, those distinctions start to become less clear as we learn more about how plants act, adapt, and react, not mindlessly, but selectively, even imaginatively. These days, some scholars contend that we should consider cognitive techniques more so than intelligence as a single attribute. One tactic is the brain, another is a system of electrical and chemical signaling cells. Both provide solutions to issues. Both enable living things to flourish in intricate, changing surroundings. However, they accomplish this by using various architectures that are tailored to various lifestyles. Therefore, it's possible that the plant kingdom is teaching humans a valuable lesson in humility. It turns out that motion, muscles, or even eyeballs are not necessary for intelligence. It doesn't even require a brain. It may be sluggish. It may be quiet. It can survive in branching mycelia, roots and leaves, as well as in fluctuating hormone gradients that are woven throughout living systems that we have just recently started to comprehend. We can allow these ideas to gently float through our minds as we become comfortable with the evening silence. Silent, quiet, and seemingly motionless, the world of plants is full of mysteries that go beyond our preconceived notions. Their rhythms are not any less rich than ours, but they are incomparably gentler. Now it's acceptable if your eyes get heavy or if your mind starts to stray. When you return, the science will be waiting for you with patience. Imagine a subtle, unfolding intelligence imprinted in every cell, the gradual dance of roots and leaves, and the whispered conversations beneath the soil. It serves as a reminder that the depths of life are frequently hidden and silent. As your mind relaxes and your breath becomes easier, remember that this tale of plants, intellect and life itself is never fully resolved. Under the stars, it waits calmly and keeps developing in silence. So the story goes on beneath the silent stars. I hope you get a good night's sleep, have a peaceful dream, and awaken tomorrow feeling rejuvenated and prepared for the day. Good night.